Another way of saying, we have the opportunity to get out of our own way. In Judeo-Christian cultures, which is primarily, not exclusively of course, but primarily the culture of the West, Western world, whether we grew up in those particular religions or not, they're so ingrained in the culture that it has an effect. And one of the presumptions of those cultures is that that somehow we're flawed from the get-go. We're somehow unworthy until proven otherwise, and that we have to qualify ourselves, by believing the right thoughts, acting according to a prescribed set of rules, and if we do that well enough, then we will be granted everlasting peace by some external judgmental God. Right? The fundamental basis is that as is, you're not worthy. You have to earn that. Right? Somehow flawed or defective or less than until proven otherwise. And in some ways, therapy, psychological therapy, is similar in that there's an attempt to fix you, right? As if somehow you are the, sum total of, all your patterns, all your conditioned behaviors, and that, in order to sort of be a fully functional adult, then, there's some things that have to be fixed, sort of debugged in a way, almost like a computer tech would debug a computer, pick out the dysfunctional programs and, rewrite them, get rid of them, upgrade them, whatever. So, but both of these presume something to be fixed, something to be changed to sort of qualify you. So it's interesting in some Eastern religions, not all, but some, primarily Buddhist or Zen, some of the sects, start off with an entirely different premise, and that is that what you truly are from the get-go is perfect. Not flawed. And that our task in this lifetime is to just remove the misperceptions that may have accumulated that obscure our already innate nature. Right? So it's quite a different premise. And the outcomes differ, right? That sense of, that we're not fundamentally sinful beings, hoping to gain the good graces of some judgmental divine being. It's quite different than starting with the assumption that what we truly are is already pristine. Right? And it's just, accumulated misunderstandings that we took on in innocence, through growing up in this lifetime that cause us not to be able to see that clearly. So we were it's more a sense of just, we're a little befuddled, right? We don't quite see things clearly. In essence, everything's fine, but there's just sort of clearing away a little debris to get to what's already present. So it's not about attaining anything. It's not dependent on some external force sort of approving or disapproving us. It's a gift that's already been given, and our task in this lifetime is just to discover the reality of it, to fully receive it. Right. So the two approaches are very different in feeling. So we can look at this, current state, this body-mind that, over the course of a lifetime has been thoroughly conditioned, right? Everything about this body-mind is conditioned. Everything. Not all, dysfunctionally, of course. I mean, there's a vast majority of it is useful conditioning. There's, some genetic conditioning, color of our eyes, gender, general physique, etc. What tends to be challenging for us is the conditioning picked up in this lifetime. Without our knowledge, without, consciously deciding to take on that conditioning, it was just sort of ingested along the way, through our association at a very young age with our parents and teachers and schoolmates and etc. And so that patterning became it felt very much like a part of what we are. It wasn't really held at arm's length. When we began to notice it, perhaps as a teenager or as an adult, when we began to recognize what elements of that conditioning or behaviors or patterns were felt constraining, felt embarrassing, felt limiting, felt like they kept us apart from other people, apart from life, caused us to not feel like we didn't fully engage with life. Those kind of patterns. Like I say, most of the conditioning is just fine. The ability of our organs to function, our conditioning the body to learn how to walk and drive a car and talk and write and stand up and sit down, and all of those things we had to learn to the point where the body felt well conditioned to do them without needing our mental attention. So it's just the psychological conditioning that causes us to behave or come up with mental patterns that cause us to suffer. And when we look, all of the functions of the body are conditioned. Some mostly good, some not so good. So what we're talking about from here on out is the conditioning, generally psychological conditioning, that just doesn't serve our deepest purpose. And we can try to fight with that. We can try to manage that. We can try to coerce it or coddle it or excuse it or justify it or, it's what most people typically do, is trying to manage it somehow, manage it as best they can. Or people just figure, well, I'll just live with it. I guess that's, how I was born. What can I do? There's a feeling like this conditioning can be so deeply ingrained that it just feels like it's hardwired. Like it's just who I am. What can I do? It's just the pattern. I'm just a angry person or a shy person or a judgmental person or whatever. It's just what I am. Hey, get used to it. But if we actually try to go about, trying to change that, being opposed to it, try to force ourselves into submission, that's it's like trying to reprogram something that's so deeply programmed it's hard to get to the root of it. It can be done in small measures, and there's some usefulness to that in society. It may help you get a better job or get along better with the kids, or it has some usefulness. But if we devote our entire life to sort of improving that, working on that, gradually, sort of chipping away at the rough edges, we're still dealing with, rearranging deck chairs on a boat that's headed towards an iceberg, right? We're not really getting to the heart of the problem. So when we really start looking at this, the assertion that everything about this body-mind is conditioned may sound shocking, but what's even more shocking is when we actually go to look for it ourselves and notice that that's true, right? So if that were the end of the story, that would be a sad tale, right? Because if everything is conditioned in the body-mind, that would mean all the thoughts are conditioned. And then there's sort of no exit from that house of mirrors. One thought arguing with another thought. When it's all conditioned, there's no exit from that. There's no ultimate resolution in trying to fix or improve or somehow transform all of those behaviors, because whatever we can change to some degree, it'll always feel like there's more to do, or it doesn't always function the way we'd like it to function. There's always it's never quite enough, never quite satisfies us, because we're trying to deal with it on the level of conditioning. So at some point, if we've really investigated that thoroughly and honestly, at some point we might begin to wonder, everywhere I look is conditioning, everywhere. Myself, other people, I wonder if there's anything that's not conditioned. It's not a thing, but the only thing that is unconditioned is awareness. It's unconditioned because it's not of the world of form, doesn't have a duration, doesn't have a size, doesn't have attributes to speak of. It's just aware. It's aware of the world of form, but in itself it's not of that world. So it's like, the thoughts that run through our head are objects, we could say, that appear within this field of awareness that we are. And so we can see those objects, we can recognize them, become aware of them as thoughts, but they themselves are not aware. The world of form doesn't have that capacity. It's awareness that is aware of the world of form. The world of form appears within awareness, that which is unconditioned is only awareness. Everything else appears within it. So we can begin to really question whether, what's the starting point on this? Are we starting from this thoroughly conditioned body mind and trying to improve our way to peace and liberation? Is that going to work? It's sort of the same question as what most scientists, neuroscientists, try to do, is to figure out how awareness arises from the material world, how the body-mind produces consciousness. So they start with the presumption that, what's real is this material world, and yes, there's consciousness. How does this material body-mind produce consciousness? So that becomes the whole question. It's called the hard problem of philosophy, hard problem of consciousness, right? How does this dark wet mass in our head produce awareness? How does it do that? But the starting presumption is never questioned. Like, are we starting from the right direction? But the direction that they're starting from is what's fundamental and real is this material world. And then, yes, there's this thing called consciousness. So how does the material world produce that? But what's never questioned is whether the material world is what is most fundamental. And that question can be answered by just noticing for ourselves. We don't need a PhD to figure that one out. The research that most scientists are doing having to do with consciousness is sort of figuring out what parts of the brain light up under certain stimulations. Okay, great, wonderful. But just because a certain emotion or sensation or perception lights up a particular part of the brain, activates that, doesn't at all mean that that has anything to do with consciousness. It just means that, yes, that part of the brain is related to those kinds of perceptions. Wonderful. Great. But it's sort of like looking at your hand. You can see your hand, right? It's an object within perception. And your hand can transmit information to your brain. It can transmit the sensation of a soft touch or a hot stove. The question is the hand itself possessing separate awareness? No. Awareness is aware of the perception. It would sort of be like if, let's say, a person was in a traffic accident and lost their leg. If awareness originated in the leg as a function of one's, cells and etc. in the leg, that if you lost your leg, you'd lose 20% of your awareness. But the awareness remains. It's aware of the fact that you've lost your leg. So the objects within awareness, whether they're a hand, a leg, a thought, perception of the table across the room, all of those are objects appearing within awareness. None of them define awareness. None of them define that innermost sense of what we are. So the alternative, rather than starting out from the presumption, and it's nothing more than that, the presumption that this physical world is the fundamental reality, the alternative is to start out with awareness is the fundamental reality, and the physical world appears within it. And we've never experienced anything outside of our awareness. Never, ever. It all appears within that innate capacity that we have to just to notice, just to be present for. So when we first start inquiring into this awareness, it can sound like, sort of a tenuous philosophical point, whereas the physical world, now that's solid, right? We can touch it, see it, feel it, taste it. But this awareness, we can't ever get a really good look at it. It feels more elusive. But in fact, the physical world is what is always changing. I mean, when we go to sleep at night, it disappears. As far as we know, it doesn't exist for hopefully 8 hours. Whereas this awareness is always present, necessarily present. This awareness isn't actually changing from moment to moment. It has a unchanging quality, not a dead kind of unchanging, very alive unchanginess to it. So when we look at it more from that perspective, that the awareness is what is most fundamental, has an unchanging capacity within which everything happens, everything is noticed. And we miss it for all kinds of reasons. We miss it because we think, no, it can't be that simple. We miss it because we imagine that what we're looking for is obscure, and it's right in front of us all the time, constantly present, never absent. But we miss it because we're looking for the rare and the obscure. And we miss it because we think, well, we couldn't possibly achieve some state of peace, not with all these faults, not with my faults. That doesn't sound reasonable. We miss it because we are waiting for some special experience, of course, in the future sometime, not now, but sometime in the future, I'm hoping for a special experience, a peak experience, an enlightening experience that'll sort of tilt me over the threshold. But to do that denies what's already present. And what is essentially what we are must be present always, right? If it's essential to our beingness, and if we're absent even for a moment, what would happen? But we deny that in favor of some hoped for experience in the future. It's going to be special. It's going to look like a certain way. I've read about it. I'm quite certain how it's going to be. But in the meantime, to hope for it then is to deny it now. And the truth of it is, that which we seek is present for the peak experiences and the mundane experiences, challenging experiences, and everything in between. It's not just present for the peak experiences. We miss it because we think we have to earn it. That somehow we buy into this unworthy myth and conclude, well, first things first, I've got to fix my faults, I've got to clean up my act, I've got to improve myself, and then maybe. So we go down that road. We miss it because we think we can figure it out. We can get there through mental cleverness. But it's not subject to mental concepts. It's beyond concepts because it's not a thing. That which we are, that which we seek, is not a concept. It's what we are. We miss it because we trust our ability to assess what's true and what's not true, even though we've been fooled many times. We miss it because we trust our own thoughts, our own mental capacity, more than we trust life. And we miss it because we're looking outward for it, somewhere else, not here, not now, somewhere else. That's what we're looking for. And we miss it because it is here and now. It has to be. So these are just ways that we miss what is obvious. We miss what's right in front of us. It's not like life is being, playing hard to get, or being cagey, or being difficult, or being choosy, or being judgmental. Life isn't doing that. Life is doing everything it possibly can to nudge us in the direction of enlightenment, of realization of what we truly are. Everything, all the time. But it is ourselves that are obstinate, obstinate by just sort of catering to our own conditioning, defending it, justifying it, protecting it. That conditioning has everything to do with what we're not, right? So our task in this lifetime really isn't to fix that. I mean, that's what we've been taught to do, is that, doing achieves things, and here's spirituality that, I just have to try harder, do more, meditate more, read more, believe more, adopt the right philosophy, eat the right things, dress the right way, find the right teacher. So we're engaged in all of this doing, right? All of these practices to get from here to there. But what we rarely do is ask who it is that's doing all of this. It's doing all of this seeking. Who is that character? What is that motivated by? What is that in belief of? What is that in service to? So that we can question. Um, when we begin to see that the sticking point here isn't life, isn't divinity sort of playing hide and seek with us. It's actually just being obstinate, refusing to see what life is offering at every moment. And freedom is achievable in this lifetime. So why do we hesitate? Hesitate to let go? Hesitate to really look deeply and honestly? And the answer in many cases is that we just haven't suffered enough. We haven't suffered enough to be willing to take that step of letting go into life, that step of trusting life more than our sort of mental maneuvers. So when we talk about freedom in spirituality, the question is really freedom from what? It's not freedom to go out and do any silly thing that we want to, just to sort of please our, pleasure centers. It's not about that. Clearly, hopefully it's not. So what is the freedom from? It's really the freedom from the belief in this thoroughly conditioned body-mind as being the entirety of what I am. So it's not this movement, the spiritual journey is not about attaining something that we're not. It's really about recognizing what we already are. And what we already are, in essence, is already free of that conditioning. Conditioning all has to do with the body-mind, all has to do with the material world. We can spend a lifetime trying to fix it, modify it, improve it. It's not bad, but it just won't lead to any kind of ultimate resolution. What will is the recognition that what we truly are is already free of that conditioning. We don't need to fix it. It'll change once we stop insisting that that's who we are. Not overnight, but it will change. But it'll change precisely because we're no longer fighting it, no longer arguing with it, no longer trying to fix it, being opposed to it. It'll change because we can see it's not what we really are. We've pulled the plug. We've pulled the plug that was energizing it, which was our belief in that it was real. So this path to salvation or freedom, or however you want to term it, is not through sort of improving the conditioning. fixing us, purifying our, our functional self. It's nice, but it's not, it doesn't lead to any ultimate resolution. What does is simply the recognition of what is already present as our true being, as our deepest nature, as what we are already. As St. Francis said, you are already what you seek. You are already that. We miss it because we believe otherwise. We miss it because we're quite sure how everything works. We're quite certain how to go about this. And the realization of that isn't, like I said, isn't an attainment, isn't becoming something that we're not. It's actually being relieved of a burden. That's why it feels good. That's why it feels really good. We find ourselves being relieved of a burden that we may have only suspected we were carrying. But the relief of when it's taken off our shoulders is enormous. And the burden that we were carrying was, just all of the effort needed to prop up this false idea of who we are as a separate self. That's it. That's the burden that we're relieved of, just simply because it's not true. And it takes a great deal of effort when we think it is true, because then we have to defend our conditioning. We have to justify it. We have to fix it. We have to be protective of it. It takes a lot of effort. When it's seen that that's not essentially who we are, it's just not that serious. So what keeps that in place is resistance. That resistance is founded on knowledge, thinking we know something that we don't. It's founded on certainty. It's founded on fascination with concepts. Right? Life is always pointing out the false nature of those things. It's always showing reality that is far, far more amazing than any knowledge about it, any capacity to name it or describe it or reduce it to calculations or equations. Life is far vaster than that. Knowledge is useful, but the recognition of seeing life directly is something life is pointing to all the time. We might be quite certain about how things are, and life is always sort of slipping a banana peel under us, where we find out that life doesn't always conform to the way we think it should be. And of course, life is, whatever concept that we might be entertaining, life, of course, is always going to be beyond that. Always going to be more amazing, more creative, more challenging than any concept we can have about it. But often we're afraid to let go of this conditioning, willingness to sort of see that life can exist without our dependence on identification with that conditioning. We have the opportunity to see that. But we often choose not to, because it can feel like a loss of control. If I'm not viewing the world through my conditioning, what I know about the world and what I'm quite certain about myself, if I'm not viewing the world through that, then, where do I stand? Good question, huh? One thing is certain: when we view the world through our conditioning, the world tends to appear like that, a bit stale. We become removed from it. We become removed from, by virtue of that filter that we ourselves placed between us and other people, us and the world. But we feel like if we gave that, just set that aside and viewed things directly in our own direct experience, we feel like if we did that, we would be vulnerable. We might lose control. But the fact is, we're not in control now. Life has always had the upper hand. We just imagined that we had some say in the matter. But this journey is really not about grappling with the conditioning on the level of conditioning. It's really just stepping outside of it altogether and looking at recognizing what is unconditioned already. And from that perspective, looking back on conditioning, we can see it for what it is. It happened along the way. It happens to everybody in all kinds of different ways. Mostly functional, some not so functional. There's no blame. We didn't choose to take on certain conditioning. It just happened. So the task in this lifetime is really not to spend all our energies trying to fix something about ourselves that we believe need to be fixed. It's not about defending it, arguing in favor of it. It's just noticing that all of that drama is happening within the awareness that is already present, fully present, equally present in all of us. It's just one awareness. It has to be equal. It's not like there's gradations of awareness, or your awareness is better than someone else's awareness. The awareness is as it is. There may be thoughts that intrude, that filter, where that awareness is filtered through the ideas and perceptions and conditionings of the body-mind, so the behavior looks different, but the awareness itself is not. Awareness itself is as it is, and that awareness is pristine, and it is what you are.